Tonight on Nova. This isn't just a rainstorm. It's valuable farmland being washed away. And as it goes, so does next year's harvest. All over the world, uncontrolled soil erosion degrades the land and poses a serious threat to food production. But farmers everywhere are fighting back in a desperate effort to keep soil on the fields and food on their plates. Can the struggle to save the soil be won, or will the world starve?
Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. Additional funding was provided by the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying healthcare products worldwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials.
It's harvest time in China. The crop is millet. The survival of these villagers depends on what they can grow. This is one of the poorest regions of China. Only a generation ago, famine was widespread, and millions died of hunger. But no one will starve this winter. The harvest has produced enough food to last for at least 2 years. The granaries are full. In the highlands of Ethiopia, it's also harvest time. The barley has been gathered in. This is a good harvest, but it won't be enough. Not long ago, Ethiopia could feed all its people. But now, much of the land is barren, and thousands are starving. Ethiopia's scarred landscape serves as a warning to the rest of the world. Protect the soil or risk starvation. But poverty forces many farmers to take more from the earth than they can return. Even the roots of their crops are dug up for cattle feed. Nothing is left to enrich the soil. And nothing is left to anchor it. The forest that once grew on this hillside was cut down for fuel. Now, every rainstorm eats away at the land. With erosion stripping its surface, no plant remains can build up to improve soil structure. A poor soil yields a poor crop, and the cycle of poverty continues. 1 acre in 9 worldwide is used to grow food. If it were well managed, it could provide enough for everyone. But on every continent, valuable farmland is being ruined by man-made erosion. If unchecked, erosion could reduce world food production 20% by the year 2000, while the demand for food will have increased by 50%. To prevent world starvation, a better balance must be struck between man and nature. The Himalayas, the highest of all mountain ranges. These enormous peaks are still growing, 4 centimeters every 10 years. They're forced up by geological movements as the mass of India thrusts toward Tibet. But even as they grow, ice, frost, and water combine to cut them down. This is the natural weathering that transforms parent rock into soil. It's a slow process, taking thousands of years before even a centimeter of soil is produced. These mountains are so young that their slopes are still steep and inhospitable. It's difficult to believe that they could ever become farmland. Yet not very far away, just beneath peaks like Langtang, the people of Nepal have been farming for centuries. in Himalayan soil. But their hold on the earth is precarious. When the rains come in Nepal, they fall in torrents, like the monsoon starting here. The large raindrops strike hard at any unprotected soil. Their force breaks it loose and starts the earth on a long journey to the sea. The topsoil, the wealth of the land, is washed away. Where the ground is protected by vegetation, the water runs off clear. But in Nepal, clear water is seldom seen. Erosion threatens the farmer's tenuous grip on the mountainsides, and every season, more and more land disappears. Enough soil is lost every year from the fields of Nepal to form whole new islands downstream in the Bay of Bengal. And it's soil that Nepal can't afford to lose. Where the rivers leave the foothills of the Himalayas, they slow down and spread their sediment here across the fertile plain known as the Terai. In the process, the rivers change course violently. Floods and death follow behind. After the rains, the earth collapses in huge landslides as the rivers cut away the footings of the slopes. Here, the village of Gairathok, with 14 houses, was swept away. All but one of the villagers escaped, but they lost their land, their sole means of survival. Now, Giriraj can only grow a quarter of the food he needs.
40 years ago, I had 65 ropenis of land in my name. Now, after the 2 great landslides here that destroyed my terraces, I only have 6 ropenis of land. I have a family of 9 to support. I have got my wife and brothers living with me. I have been maintaining my family with what I can earn teaching in the primary school, as I can only grow enough food for 3 months. Apart from that, nobody has helped me. As a result of this disaster, I have lost everything. If I have to go to a new place, I haven't even got 4 pence to my name, and I have nowhere else to go anyway.
Each time the monsoon arrives, scores of people are killed and hundreds of hard-won terraces are destroyed. The forested slopes are also threatened. The number of people living on the tiny farms perched on these hills has doubled in a generation. Wood is the only source of fuel, so they have cleared the forest more and more. The slopes, left dangerously unprotected, are scarred by erosion. The damage is extensive. Eight million people now live among these middle hills of Nepal. As the landscape crumbles around them, the threat of famine grows. The farmers of the Middle Hills have managed to survive in this harsh landscape for hundreds of years in ancient villages like Gurati. Yet their future survival is in question. The farms are tiny. Each family must grow all its food on only 1/3 of a hectare, only 3/4 of an acre. Chin Bahadur is cutting maize stalks. The cobs have been harvested and a second crop of millet has been planted. By feeding the stalks to his buffalo, Chin Bahadur makes good use of his land. His buffalo provide milk and meat, and power for plowing, and they also convert the stalks into manure. This is mixed with the animal's bedding and composted, and is then spread on the land, returning valuable nutrients that the crops removed. Without the buffalo or cattle, his tiny farm would soon lose its fertility. The wood from the surrounding forest is also essential for the family's survival. Not only as fuel for heat, for the nights at an altitude of 6,000 feet are bitterly cold, but also to cook their food. Son Maya must feed her family entirely on the produce of their farm. They are so remote from the rest of the world that money figures little in their lives. The main meal of the day consists of rice with potatoes and spices. For now, Chin Bahadur and his family are not going hungry, but elsewhere there is not always enough. This year, the average family in Nepal grew only enough food to last for 8 months. Yet, these tiny farms once fed all the people of Nepal year-round. What has gone wrong? Despite the appearance of isolation, Nepal has a rapidly growing population of both humans and animals. Around each village is a large area of grazing and forest land. Herded away from the farms, the animals eat grass and leaves. Later, the dung from their pens is used to fertilize the terraces. To keep the system in balance, there should be just one cow or buffalo for each person, and they should graze only 4 times as much forest land as the family cultivates. But now there are too many mouths to feed, too many animals for the grazing lands and forest. The grass is overgrazed. The ground is laid bare to the rain. The goats eat the young trees, and the forest is destroyed. The farmers allow this to happen because they have no choice. The animals are already half-starved, so they eat whatever they can find. In winter, when there is even less grass, the villagers feed their animals the branches of broad-leafed trees. To stay alive, the farmers are destroying the forest, threatening the very balance of resources that sustains them. But it is not only the farmers that are to blame. The magnificent cities like Bhaktapur, with its splendid temples and palaces, were built with the products of the forests and farms of the Middle Hills. With land taxes and timber, the countryside was exploited for the benefit of the towns. This continued for centuries. Finally, in the 1950s, it became obvious that trees were being cut far faster than they were growing. The government took control of the forest in an attempt to protect it and plant new trees. Villagers, their cattle, and their goats were to be kept out by armed guards and barbed wire fences. But the villagers no longer felt any responsibility for the forest, so they abused it even more. And the government rangers became the enemies of the people. The program to restore the forest seemed doomed. But then, a district forestry officer was sent to the village of Chautura to establish a reforestation program there. In the beginning, he followed the established methods for protecting a plantation.
When I first arrived in early 1973, there was no tradition of planting trees in this area. And when I first started that, project of planting trees, I got some fence wire for planting this area, keep the animals away
But barbed wire was expensive, and after his very first planting, he couldn't get any more. He knew it was vital to plant more trees, so he had to find a different way to keep the animals out. He discussed the problem with the village leaders.
And in that process, we got to work with the local people, got their cooperation by working with them. And it was very fortunate that the local people kept their animals away, and as a result of which fences were no more required.
Tej Mahat was the first forester to involve the local people in a strategy to protect the forest, and it worked. They began to keep the animals out themselves, and today Chowtara is the most successfully replanted area in Nepal. In the new system, villagers are allowed free access to the forest to cut grass for their cattle, but animals are excluded. People, unlike animals, can easily tell grass from young trees. They cut only the edible undergrowth, but leave the trees alone. The animals' feed is brought back to the farms. With this method, Sukumaya no longer has to watch the cattle as they graze. Now she has time to go to school. Feeding in a stall brings other advantages. Cattle will eat less favored plants which they reject in the forest, and all of the dung is left on the farm. The villagers now share the benefits of the forest with the government, and the guards, for the first time, have become their friends. Community forestry has taken root. The farmers and villagers have found a simple yet effective way to protect their forests, and so are protecting their own futures. In 1978, Tej Mahat and the Forestry Department began to get technical and financial aid from an Australian project. The first task was to build a road to the town, saving a 3-day walk. Don Gilmore comes from the Australian National University. He's a tropical forester. Like Tej, Don knows that the way to make the project succeed is to understand not just the needs of the people, but the reality of their isolation from the developed world. The project with the government now has over 100 nurseries growing trees. Most are still several days' walk from the new road. The methods he uses are specifically tailored to local conditions.
Well, in normal situation, people would use a certain amount of artificial chemicals, fertilizers and hormones. In this situation, we absolutely insist that those sorts of inputs are not provided into the nurseries, because it's important that once the project leaves this area, that the local people have the ability to maintain the nursery operations entirely from their own inputs, and that is from using natural composts and not from using artificial fertilizers. So that's the big difference. In addition, central administration has great difficulty in organising all the works that are necessary to be carried out without the support of the local population. During this last planting season, we established about 200 individual planting sites, and that can't be done without the active support of the local population, because the forestry department simply doesn't have sufficient trained technical manpower to carry out the work that is necessary.
The farmers rely on broadleaf trees for animal fodder. Surprisingly, the best way to get them is to plant pines first.
From an ecological point of view, the pine trees perform a very useful function by providing a lot of protection to the soil surface immediately within the canopy. Under this tree, you can see the pine litter is already becoming decomposed and being incorporated into the soil. And the soil itself is becoming nice and friable and loose, which contrasts very strongly with the harsh environment immediately outside the canopy of the tree. And underneath this tree, the environment has been improved to such an extent that a broadleaf tree has already become well and truly established.
Don's method allows the broadleaf trees to grow up within the protection of the hardier pine trees. 11 years after planting only pines, this has become a mixed forest. These community leaders have come to discuss the best way to manage the forest now that it's grown. They will receive 3/4 of the wood that it produces, a new source of income for their villages. Chowtara is exceptional in Nepal in that forest here is being planted faster than it's being cut down. It's become the model for a huge national project funded by the World Bank. Saving Nepal's forests is the first step in halting erosion's course and in ensuring enough food for its growing population. But the situation is still critical. In most areas, trees are being cut down 3 times as fast as they're being planted. Yet the replanting and conservation effort in Chowtarah has shown that surprisingly simple strategies tailored to local conditions can help to keep soil where it belongs and where it's needed. And the farmers themselves, with a personal stake in the success of these projects, may prove to be the best guardians of the land. In Nepal, without trees, the agricultural system breaks down. The same is true in many other countries. In the tropics especially, a shortage of firewood has led to deforestation. Erosion has followed, and with it a decline in food production. 20 years ago, Africa was nearly self-sufficient in food. Since then, production per head has fallen by 20%. The famine in Ethiopia is a tragic example of what happens when deforestation and erosion aren't checked. The central highlands of Ethiopia. A few generations ago, this tiny village was surrounded by forest. At that time, 40% of the country was green with trees. Now, the land lies unprotected, and when the fierce tropical rainstorms come in summer, they tear away not just the topsoil, but the whole landscape. Arable land is losing 6 millimeters of soil each year, 2.5 times as much as in Nepal. When the land gets to this state, it's useless, and erosion rapidly swallows up still more farms. Here, soil loss, not drought, is the main cause of famine. Food production depends on topsoil, the thin, fertile layer of brown earth containing the rotted remains of plants and teeming with microscopic life. Below is the red subsoil, less fertile and lacking the vegetable matter that stores water between rains. Below that, the lighter-colored soil has been formed from the rock which lies at the bottom. Erosion can strip it all away. Gullies are the most destructive form of erosion, and they're worst in tropical countries where heavy rainstorms fall on land which is dry. Gullies can grow with dramatic speed as water cuts down to the bedrock. This gully is over 20 meters deep, cut by streams running off the hillside. It was carved in about 50 years. Once it was roofed by productive land, and forest grew on top. But gullies can be treated. This one has been seeded with strong grasses to check the speed of the water, and planted with trees to bind the soil. Grazing animals have been kept out, and the gully has stabilized. Because gullies get started when water runs off hillsides, they must also be treated. Here, both topsoil and subsoil have been washed away, leaving only rock. But by putting a stop to grazing, grass and trees have returned, and soil has begun to form. The sick land can begin to recover. Ethiopia's erosion was caused by farming practices, and yet the farmers are only partly to blame. Until recently, families didn't own their own land, but lived under a feudal system where they worked for a local landlord. Ayalech Adare had to supply the landlord with firewood. Tilahun Makuria, her husband, used to pay 3/4 of his harvest as tax and a further 1/10 to the church. The landlords made no effort to improve the land, and the farmers were too poor to improve it themselves. Now they reap the consequences of that neglect. Droughts are common here, but they have not always brought famine. But now, because of the poor soil, the family's harvests have declined, and with no reserves of food, they become more and more vulnerable to the weather. Ayalech and Tilahun farm on the bleak central highlands. The wall protects their sheep from foxes and hyenas. As the population of Ethiopia has grown, the number of domestic animals has also increased. The families need the income they provide, but the amount of land for each family has gotten smaller. This has led to serious overgrazing and erosion. As the soil is washed away, the farms become more and more stony and unworkable. With so few trees, animal dung is the only source of fuel. To Ayalech and Tilahun, it's also an important source of income. Compared with other Ethiopian farmers, they are well off. But still, the harvest is so poor that they must use the dung that would otherwise replenish the soil. Every day, Ayalech collects the dung left by her animals. It's mixed with water and straw and made into cakes to burn. If firewood were plentiful, Ayalech would be spared this time-consuming task. When the cakes are dried, they burn well, with no smell. They use some for their own cooking, but most are sold to people in the town. In Shoa province, all animal dung is used for fuel. But the right place to put it is back on the land, where it would restore fertility and reduce erosion. The local market is at Debre Berhan. Thousands of donkey loads of fuel arrive here every week. Selling fuel accounts for 3/4 of the total trade. A load of dung sells for about 75 cents. Firewood costs 4 times as much. So most people burn dung. But the more they burn, the more the fertility of their fields will decline. If they were able to put it on the land, their harvests would increase by 20%. The farmers themselves are aware of their dilemma.
It's because of the shortage of firewood. As there is so little firewood, we have to make the cakes of dung and straw to cook with, and also for money to buy everything else. Our livelihood depends on it.
The family shares their one mud hut with their dog and a few chickens. The national dish of Ethiopia, injera, is made from a fermented pancake mixture. Injera, with only a few spices, makes up the main meal of the day. In 1985, this family grew enough food for only 10 months, even though it was a fairly good year. By constantly removing the fertility of the soil, they're trapped into declining harvests and a downward spiral of poverty. Another drought could force them to sell everything they own to buy food. They would have to leave the land and join the ranks of homeless refugees. But in Ethiopia, as in all countries, the welfare of families and the land also depends on politics. The socialist revolution of 1973 was triggered by a famine. Chairman Mengistu Haile Mariam replaced Emperor Haile Selassie with a Marxist military regime. The new government dispossessed the landlords and divided the country's farmland among peasant associations. Its communist policies have received little support from Western governments, Yet they have begun to address the damage done to the land for generations. The farmers are allocated land by the peasant associations. And for the first time, they are being organized to do communal work to conserve the soil they farm. Here, on some of the better land, they're digging ditches along the contours and raising terraces that will stop the soil from washing downhill. One problem with this kind of conservation work is that it takes 10% of the land out of production, so at first the total harvests are smaller. But when it rains, the water no longer runs off, carrying the precious topsoil away. Trapped in the ditches, more water seeps into the ground, and soil moisture directly affects the size of the harvest. After only 1 year, the farmers do see a benefit. On the edge of the terraces where water and soil have collected is a strip where the crop of barley has grown better. The harvest can be 4 times as big as before. Another way that soil conservation has been encouraged is in food payments sponsored by the World Food Program of the United Nations. For working on the terraces, each farmer receives 6.5 pounds of grain and 4 ounces of oil a day, surpluses donated mostly by the US and Europe. During the famine, these food payments allowed thousands of families to stay on the land and at the same time to improve it. The food payments and the new terraces can help to prevent further loss of Ethiopian soil, but they are only a partial solution. Poverty is the main cause of land degradation in Ethiopia. To reverse it, there must be a huge investment in agriculture. But much of the government's budget is spent on fighting the war with Eritrea.
Now, this really means that the rate at which soil conservation activities are being constructed is less than the rate of erosion itself. So we still have not caught up with the rate of erosion, which is just extraordinary, something like 2,000 million tons per year. And we have not caught up with that rate yet. And the program will need to expand in various ways to do more. So all that you have seen, although it's tremendously impressive, is still only a drop in the bucket.
The program of soil and water conservation started, unfortunately, in lands which have been degraded. One should have really started the other way around to maintain the productivity in those areas which are presently considered to be productive and producing surplus food. But because of the perception of the farmers, perception of the politicians and other administrators, it's very difficult in a state like ours to start conservation work where you don't have the problem. Incidentally, in this country, the highest soil loss is taking place in these productive areas, and therefore, unless actions are taken immediately, the chances of these lands becoming as unproductive and as bad as the other parts which you have seen is very close.
A long-term solution to the crisis depends not only on money, but on recognizing the roots of the problem. This peasant association, Lagambo in the Harage Highlands, is fortunate in having help from the University of Alamaya. It shows what can be done if the land is used in the right way. Here on the best land, sweet potatoes have been planted on the crest of ridges, which form a grid and collect rainfall. The method called tide ridging also prevents the loss of topsoil and eliminates the need to enrich the less fertile subsoil with chemical fertilizers.
The advantage of tide ridge is when we have a rain, there will not be any runoff and the water stays here and it infiltrates down to the ground. And also there will not be any runoff from this area. So both it holds water, secondly the runoff will be reduced and surface soil will not be lost. It is very important because fertilizer is expensive, it requires foreign exchange, And because of that reason, we are looking for alternatives of fertilizer application so that the small farmers can be getting a yield increase per hectare basis without having a lot of money put in, and also without the addition of fertilizer.
These eucalyptus trees, planted on tide ridging, are only 5 years old, and they were grown on marginal land. Deliberately setting aside acreage for a plantation like this is a critical step towards ecological stability for the peasant association. Thanks to these methods, the farmer's income here is now 6 times higher than it was 5 years ago. But this association at Lagambo is not typical. The government has yet to use the system it has created to its full advantage. The lion's share of government investment in agriculture goes to large state farms, like this cotton farm at Arba Minch. They receive almost all of the chemical fertilizer the government can afford to import. While cash crops like cotton help Ethiopia's balance of trade, they don't help the country's long-term food problem, because they take land and resources away from the peasant farmers who must grow 90% of the country's food. Compounding the problem is an inequitable market system. In Addis Ababa, some grain is sold at a free market price. But the government, to ensure its own survival, needs to keep the population of the cities happy by keeping food plentiful and prices low. So the peasant farmers are forced to sell much of their harvest to the government at well below market value to feed the army, the civil servants, and the towns. With such poor returns on their harvest, the farmers have little incentive to produce more, even if they could. A favorite grain called teff is now almost unobtainable.
Here in Addis, it may cost as much as 250 birr for a quintal for 100 kilograms of teff, whereas the market price that the government pays to buy it is 50. Now that's an extraordinary difference. The Ethiopian farmer doesn't know if he can get an adequate price that will give him an incentive to increase production. So that without a radical change in government sales policy, in government buying policy, in government marketing policy, it's very, very difficult to see how the Ethiopian farmer is going to make a drastic increase in his production, which is called for by the increase in population that is foreseen over the next 10, 20 years.
So the future remains uncertain for Ayalech and her family. Hunger is still widespread in Ethiopia, but steps are finally being taken to reclaim the soil. And with the right kind of help from the government, Ethiopia might have a chance to recover from its devastation. Farmers everywhere must find a way to maintain their fragile relationship with the land or suffer the consequences of erosion. Although the rate of erosion is difficult to measure, it is estimated that nearly 23 billion tons of soil are lost each year. Today, half of all countries are experiencing soil loss at unacceptable levels. The worst erosion problem in the world is in northern China, on the upper reaches of the Yellow River. Controlling it is one of the greatest challenges China has ever faced. Of all the great rivers in the world, the Yellow River carries the most sediment. That's why it's yellow. The river is also dangerous. It's called China's sorrow, because it so often brought floods and death to the countryside. In the Great Flood of 1887, the river spilled out over the whole North China plain. 3,000 villages were flooded and 7 million people were drowned. The problem begins on the huge Loess Plateau, about the size of Colorado. It was formed of fine soil blown here by the wind when the glaciers of the Ice Age retreated. The plateau was once a level plain covered with forest and grassland. But since man began to farm it, 2,000 years of catastrophic erosion have turned it into a network of huge gullies. More than half an inch of soil is lost every year. For centuries, the villagers have struggled to grow crops on every scrap of land within reach. In places, they even use ropes because the fields are so steep. But the harvests are poor, and when the rains come, a family's livelihood can disappear in one storm. The soil that washes from the lowest plateau ends up here in the Yellow River. Every year, 1.6 billion tons of sediment are washed away in the summer floods, enough to cover greater New York knee-deep in mud. As the river slows, some of the sediment settles to the bottom. This causes the riverbed to rise as much as 2.5 inches every year. The water has risen higher and higher above the land until it flows like a giant and menacing aqueduct, held back only by dikes that must be raised every few years. In 1985, the dike at Huayankou had to be repaired. The dikes themselves are built of silt, so brushwood is first tied down to prevent the river from washing it away. They are struggling not so much against the river as against the damage that's been done to the land upstream. It's been a relentless battle, and one that they have often been in danger of losing. In the last 2,000 years of China's long history, these dikes have been breached 1,500 times. The riverbed has risen nearly 7 feet in just 40 years, and it now rushes 30 feet above the surrounding farmland. Only the dike in the distance protects the farms below. For 500 miles, the river flows above rich, level farming land, the rice bowl of China. If it were to flood again, not only would it drown millions, but it would also destroy much of China's rice crop and bring famine on a massive scale. The Chinese had always dreamed of taming the Yellow River, and in 1957, with the help of the Soviet Union, they began to build a huge dam and hydroelectric plant at Senmensha. But today, the floodwaters pour straight through the sluice gates. The turbines are silent for 5 months of the year. They generate only 1/5 of the electricity intended. The dam was built to control and store the summer floods. Now the reservoir is half empty. As soon as it was completed, it began to fill up with mud. Every year, the storage capacity got smaller. Now the Chinese have to open the sluice gates in the flood season to allow the river to scour the mud away. In a flood emergency, the gates could still be closed, but all this power is wasted, and the river will remain untamed as long as it carries this enormous burden of silt. The only cure will be to stop the soil erosion where it begins, back on the lowest plateau. These peasant farmers are building a different kind of dam. This one is deliberately designed to trap silt. For nearly 40 years, check dams have been built in the gullies of the plateau. It took only 3 weeks to build this dam, 20 feet high, using technology no more complex than shovels and wheelbarrows. The dam turns the process of erosion to the farmer's advantage. The silt washed off the hillsides is captured behind the dam as the water drains off through a pipe. The soil, which would have been lost down the river, then becomes valuable level land where nothing could grow before. After just one season, the farmers are rewarded for their hard work, and the new land is divided among them. Check dams are a good long-term strategy for reducing erosion. And because farmers can gain new land, there is an incentive to continue building them. But such simple techniques will not be enough. Here, as in Ethiopia, soil loss has been the consequence of poor farming practices, which in turn grew out of political decisions. Erosion got worse under Mao because of his obsession with making the Chinese self-sufficient in grain. It was prohibited to plant trees or grass. Forests were cleared, and even the steepest slopes were sown with grain. Yet food production actually declined because erosion became so bad. Things have changed dramatically since Mao's death. Apple trees now protect the terraces and bring a valuable cash crop. They are tangible results of the government's new policy of giving the farmers incentives to diversify their farming. Between 1959 and 61, 16 million Chinese starved to death. Even now, China must support a fifth of the world's population on only a 15th of the world's arable land. This is one of the poorest areas of China, and there is a desperate need to improve the standard of living. The Loess Plateau has very little rainfall and a harsh climate. In winter, the temperatures fall well below freezing. The people carve their houses into the Loess soil like tunnels and face them with stone. But here at Chiajiago, one fundamental change in the Chinese government's policy has brought a sudden increase in food supplies and prosperity. Like all Chinese farmers, Gao Zhengling formerly had to work for a production brigade. The work was communal and the produce shared. But the system was abolished in 1979. Now, Gao Zhengling is allocated his own quota of land to farm for 15 years. He'll have to give only a small amount of this year's sorghum crop to the local government. The rest he can keep or sell. The advantage of the new system is that each family has the freedom to use the land in the way that they think best. They now grow a variety of crops, and many also choose to keep animals. The local market at the little country town of Mize now takes place every 5 days. Open trading was illegal under Mao. Now it is encouraged. As crop yields have increased, many people can earn a living by trading, and the pressure on the land is eased. It is no longer the only source of income. Now the only fuel sold is coal. It is plentiful in the area, but before it was not mined because nobody could afford to buy it. Sheep are being introduced, and a trade in wool is beginning. But most farmers prefer to buy cattle. They know that as well as providing milk and meat, the dung will improve the land. Like Chin Bahadur in Nepal, Gao feeds his cow on chopped maize stalks. He no longer has to burn them for fuel. His new calf gets a more nutritious feed of vegetable peelings, bran, and even maize. This would have been unthinkable a few years ago. Gao's tunnel house has windows made of paper. Glass is too expensive. But thanks to this new diversity of crops, his wife, Ai Shilian, can cook more varied meals, improving her family's nutrition. Here, the key to unwinding the downward spiral of poverty leading to land degradation was in allowing a market system to develop. Now the farmers get better prices for their crops. Already they have more food. The family's granary is still full from last year. And instead of stripping the forest, they can afford to buy coal to burn.
Take my family. Our standard of living is much better than before, far better than before. Now we can get enough food to eat, and extra food besides that we can sell. The economy of our village has diversified in many ways, so our standard of living is improving. For example, they let us rear animals, cows or sheep, which gives us money to spend. Besides that, some of us can grow crops with scientific advice. Then we can turn the grain to food, like noodles, to make more spending money. Now, crops from our land will grow enough food for more than 2 years. Our lives depend on this. Now the villagers are beginning to terrace the land. Before, nobody built terraces. So now, our standard of living is getting better and better, day by day.
Not all the villages are as well off as Chiajiago, but everywhere in the region, stonemasons are at work building new houses for the farmers. It's a clear sign of increasing prosperity. A new harmony is being achieved between what a family consumes and what their land can provide. If this can be sustained, the standard of living will continue to rise, and for the first time, erosion in this part of China may come under control. But China still has a huge problem in that there are so many young people who have not yet had children, and the increasing population will have to be fed. Despite a strict birth control policy set by the government, the Gao family has 5 children, not uncommon in the countryside where they are needed to help on the farm. Arable land is in short supply, so as long as the population expands, crop yields will have to go on increasing. The balance could easily topple in favor of erosion once again. Still, China's recent success in the face of population pressure and land scarcity is a compelling message for the rest of the world. The welfare of the land is directly tied to the welfare of those who work it. To relieve pressure on the land and make it more productive, the cycle of poverty must be broken. But this can happen only if government policies encourage sound farming and economic practices. When farmers can look beyond their immediate survival, they will become the best guardians of the land. And there may even be food to spare.
For a transcript of this program, send $4 to Nova, Box 322, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. Please be sure to include the show title. To purchase film or video copies of this program for educational use, call toll-free 1-800-621-2131. In Illinois or Alaska, call Collect, 312-940-1260. Major funding for NOVA is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide. And by Allied Signal, a technology leader in aerospace, electronics, automotive products, and engineered materials. And the Johnson & Johnson family of companies, supplying health care products worldwide.